Welcome to the Religion and Popular Culture podcast, the podcast that discusses religion, popular culture, and everything in between.
Ooh.
Yeah, what a nice slogan. My name's Aled Thomas, and I am joined by my friend, colleague, and comrade, Vivian Asimos. Say hi, Vivian.
Hello.
Hi, Vivian. And we're very glad that you're tuning in today because I think this is going to be quite a fun episode, and I think that this episode is going to be a springboard as well for future episodes and conversations where we may even get some other voices to come and join us in the podcast as well and join in on the conversation. So
we know other people than just ourselves.
Yeah. It's not just us. So we can bring in other scholarship, other people with great ideas and so on that'll build on today's conversation. And today's conversation is going to be around invented religions, or religions that you may often associate with pop culture and fandoms. Now, this is something that we touched on in the first episode of this podcast, where we gave our overview of how religion and popular culture are not separate entities. They are deeply intertwined with one another in ways that is difficult to separate, but sometimes it's more fun, I think, to not try and separate them and actually look at the complexities of how these are meshed. So as we discussed in week one, the way people engage with popular culture can be very religious, whether it is almost a devotion to a celebrity or a fandom for a particular film series or video game series that results in ritualistic cosplaying and dressing, or just the shared community that you have based around popular culture. These are ideas that are very functionally religious. So something that I've always found interesting with fandoms and popular culture, especially if you're comparing them to religion, is the idea of meaning making, how an audience will derive meaning from an aspect of popular culture in a way that's profound for them. So you may get some critics of the idea of religion and popular culture being intertwined with one another in saying that religion is something too serious for popular culture, or popular culture can't articulate the ineffable side of religion. But I think what's important to remember is that we are essentially studying people here. And what's important is the people that we study and the way they perceive things. And the way somebody perceives something like Star Wars could be just as profound and meaningful for them as someone's perception of Christianity. So it's about leaving our judgments to one side about whether something is valuable or meaningful to someone, and seeing what it means to the fandoms and the people in question. What do you think, Vivian? What are your thoughts as I'm rambling here?
No, I mean, I obviously I agree. It'd be weird if I didn't. But I think one of the ways that I've always thought about religion, and the religion that is the kind of capital letter with an ism at the end, things like a Christianity or an Islam, those kinds of things that people kind of, I think, everywhere can point at and agree and say, yes, that's religion. I tend to think of these people as fans of their deities or their, religious devotions. It's a different type of fandom. Christians are just super into Jesus. I think that's how Christians should start redefining themselves, is by saying that they're Jesus stans. Because I think that's basically what it is. And so when we're talking about kind of fandoms and religion, I think a good way of taking that seriously, if you are someone who doesn't kind of automatically take that seriously, would be to think about all the other religions that you do take seriously in that regard. Because really, what's the main difference between being a Jesus fan and being a Cher fan? besides the fact that you can potentially meet Cher. But I guess a lot of people might think that they can potentially meet Jesus. So
yes, very true.
So maybe there isn't a difference.
That is true, and regardless of whether they are empirically meeting Jesus or not, I don't think that necessarily matters to the people who would say that they can meet Jesus.
Yeah, and I don't think meeting Cher is necessarily what a lot of people might be really caring about when it comes to being a Cher fan.
That being said, Cher, if you're listening, I'd love to meet you.
You're always welcome here.
You're always welcome on our podcast, Cher, because I know she listens. The idea of invented religions is one that has become quite a recent interest for me, really, because it's part of the conversation surrounding new religions. When we talk about invented religions, we tend to talk about religions that are recently formed. And new religions is a subject that's close to my heart because it's been it's been my area for a good few years now. Something that I think is worth mentioning on the podcast, of course, is because a religion is new doesn't make it any less quote real unquote.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always important to remember that at one point every religion was the newbie on the block.
Yeah, absolutely. And while something like Free Zone Scientology, great book out right now by me, plug. While something like Free Zone Scientology may be a bunch of people on the internet, Christianity started out as a bunch of people in their living rooms before the development of the architecture and the institutional structures that we have now come to associate with this very dominant mainstream religion, for want of a better term. So all religions are new, all religions are social constructs. Whether somebody believes the religion to hold a cosmic truth doesn't necessarily matter to this conversation. What matters is that the religions as aspects of our society were new and they started from people. And that's the case with new religions. The term new is something that I don't want to spend too much time on because you could go around in circles. When I talk about new religions, I tend to talk about something that has emerged in the past 100 years. And that's certainly where we find invented religions as well. So you may be thinking, well, Alec, surely a new religion is an invented religion. You've just said that all religions are invented.
But Alec,
yes, that's true.
Aren't all new religions invented religions?
I am so glad you asked. It's almost like I've prepared an answer for this. So the work on invented religions, there's some wonderful stuff out there, particularly by Carol Cusack and Adam Pasame. They are works on religions that have been created by people who... I think there's a double side to this. On the one hand, they acknowledge that this is an entirely human product, that there is no divine element to it. And on the other hand, there is the link to popular culture. In Carol Cusack's work on invented religions, she's pointed out that invented religions emerge because they combine religious ideas with aspects of popular culture, particularly in online spaces. And it's also known as, in Pasame's work, it's known as a hyper-real religion, which is, as he outlines, as an invented religion that is a source of inspiration on a metaphorical level from popular culture. So it's using popular culture in a metaphorical sense. So there are many examples of invented religions. Some blur the line between satire and religion, which I'll get to in a moment. And perhaps the most notable one in public discourse is Jediism. a great example of an invented religion that blends religious ideas with popular culture.
Yeah. And I think before we kind of move on, I wanted to stress this idea of the metaphor, because I find that some people kind of have a very complicated understanding of metaphor and sometimes connect it too much to simile. And this is getting a little bit into English lit classes, but this is important for our conversation for a reason. So for similes, it would be, Alad is like a camel. I don't know why I picked that. I'm sorry. It was just the first animal that came to my head for some reason. But if I'm saying Alad is like a camel, then the camel and Alad are still separate categories that we have kept separate, but we are equating, but we are still leaving them as separate categories. But as soon as I say Alad is a camel, which is a metaphor, now we're blurring those categories.
Yes.
And so that's why this distinction is really important, that when we're talking about metaphor, we are talking about that. We're talking about Alad being a camel.
Yes, exactly. And this is where, Cusack's framing of an invented religion being metaphorical use of pop culture elements is that it has blurred that boundary. It's not saying, well, this religion is a little bit like this element of popular culture. You are saying that they're one and the same, despite the fact we are acknowledging two separate categories. And I think that's what makes this really interesting.
Yes, it is both two categories and one category at the same time.
Exactly. And the question that I often get thrown at me when I discuss invented religions is the aspect of, well, this can't be a real religion, it's a film, or it's an aspect of popular culture, it's not real. But that's something we need to realize here, is that all religions were once new, and they were all influenced by the culture around them. The early Christian movements were influenced by the cultures and social norms surrounding them. So in 21st century discourse, it's arguably unsurprising that popular culture, as we currently understand it, will influence the formation of religions. As you mentioned in week one, Vivian, there has always been popular culture. Popular culture isn't this new, distinct type of culture that has only just... There has always been a popular culture. It's just that I think what we now refer to as popular culture is often misunderstood, would you say?
Yeah, I think popular culture tends to be... We think of media, right? We think of films, we think of TV shows. We might think of video games. It's funny how some people don't. I don't know why, but we think of these media forms. We strangely don't think of books very often. But books are popular culture. And books have been around for a really long time, a lot longer than movies and things like that. And before then, there were plays that people would put on. There were storytellers that would travel from town to town and tell stories, and people would gather around and listen to them, kind of like how people do now. But it's just the storyteller as a figure is replaced by a screen. But the storyteller is still there. They're the writers. They're the directors. So, yeah.
I think the advent of technology and digital communication has certainly shaped the way we understand popular culture, and this distinction between what you were referring to as the old popular culture and now the storytelling that comes from a screen. I think there's a misconception about what popular culture is based on whether it's coming from an electronic device.
Yes.
Hence why, as you were saying, people don't often turn to books.
Yeah. We don't, but we think about like the Kindle as popular culture, but not the books that are on them. Which I mean, that's probably a whole nother separate conversation, but it is a very interesting one that we think of media and digital things as these newfangled pop culture that has changed the way we communicate or see things. But really, this stuff has always kind of been there, but in different forms.
Exactly. So religions, or invented religions, drawing from something such as Star Wars, and I'm mentioning Star Wars because we'll get into Jediism in a moment, is actually quite unsurprising in many ways. It's fascinating, but it's quite unsurprising.
Yeah, and when you read, just to take, again, we keep using Christianity as an example, but I think it is a good one because it's one that probably people have the most exposure to. But if you do sit and read the Bible, you'll see a lot of the popular culture of the time influencing it and people talking about it in those books, talking against certain aspects of popular culture or for certain aspects of other popular culture. I mean, if you sit and read Leviticus, you'll see the laws that are supposed to distinguish you as a follower versus them as not the follower by following these laws. And most of them have to do with what was instilled in that culture and that popular culture at that time.
Absolutely. And this is where the conversation around legitimate and fake religion really fascinates me, because of this almost a devaluing of popular culture. And sometimes we even see that as an academic discipline, that the study of popular culture can be pushed to one side. But it definitely comes into this conversation about what is a real religion and what is a fake religion. And I have a really lovely quote here that I want to read. It's from Paul-Francois Tremlett, who is a friend of the podcast. I mean, I don't know if he's a friend of ours, so that means he's a friend of the podcast.
I'm sure he's a friend of the pod.
I'm sure he's a friend of the podcast. And so Tremlett once said in a blog post he wrote, "Scholars working on contemporary religions have described Jediism and other new religions as invented, fake, and hyper-real. However, to describe Jediism as a fake religion implies that we know a real religion when we see one." And I think that is the point that I really want to get across with this episode, is that these invented religions, these hyper-real religions, are religions. We have to break down the category of religion as much as we can. Which is something we said in week 1, wasn't it? That we like to, you've mentioned pushing these categories until they break. And the category of religion in itself, without meaning to go off on a tangent, is very Christocentric to begin with, very Western, and very much laced in ecumenical theology, which means that it's a problematic term anyway to apply to other cultures, let alone new religions that are emerging now. So, but something that I think we need to remember is that it is... Apologies for my cat.
I was worried about my dog barking, but now it's your cat.
It's my cat. Hello, Cedric. So something we need to remember is that if we're going to break things down to this level, all religions are fake, because they are all social constructs created by people and done by people. And so in week 1 of the podcast, I mentioned that I like to use the lived religion approach to religion. I like to just see what people do in everyday life, how they interact with one another, how they make meaning. And this is what we see here with invented religions. So I just wanted to get that out of the way in terms of invented religions being dismissed as fake.
Yeah, I remember back when I was doing my undergrad and I was getting really into study of religion. Obviously, I continue to do that for the rest of my life, but I was getting really into it. And I got into a conversation with my boyfriend at the time, and he was fighting against my conversation about like, oh, but what is religion? Because I was just discovering this question as an undergrad, and he kept being like, well, isn't that obvious? It's, something that has this or that. And one of the things was doctrine, he was saying, and all of these things. And I kept listing religions that didn't fit those definitions. And needless to say, we broke up. But
was that the reason?
It wasn't going to work out. But I think that it really goes to show how much that those ideas were very embedded, and all of them were things that Christianity holds.
Yeah.
All of them are things that, hell, even the Abrahamic religions, for lack of a better word, the the Christianity, the Islam, the Judaism kind of holds some of these things, but pretty much a lot of the other religions don't. And a lot of it is based also on certain structures of class and education. You know, the fact that you have to have some kind of written doctrine. There's a lot of places that don't read. So does that make their beliefs therefore less legitimate and real just because they don't have a written form of their text, you know? So it's questioning these things are important in more ways than just because popular culture things are fun. It's also important to break these down because of issues like racism and classism and sexism and all of the other isms that are issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something I've always found with new religions, is that they've always shown that you don't necessarily, you know, a religion doesn't need a god. It doesn't even need some any sort of metaphysics. It doesn't need a doctrine. You know, when you break those categories down, you really do get to the point where you think, oh, should I even bother trying to define religion? Because are we simply going around in circles? And this is where invented religion is quite fun. I've got two examples that I want to draw from today. And the second one, the Church of the SubGenius, I think the people who formed the Church of the SubGenius have a really great understanding of the social construct of religion and how religion can be almost anything, and they've really played with that in a really creative and interesting way, so I'll get to them in a moment.
But yeah, tell me about Jediism.
Let's talk about Jediism. Jediism is quite a bit of fun because the idea of a Jedi, somebody being a Jedi or Jedi being their religion, is often discussed in tandem with census results. Particularly the census results of 2001, in which a number of people had put on the question of what their religion is, that they were Jedi Knights, or that they were Jedis. And it was essentially seen as taking the mick, poking fun at religion, that they're not actually Jedi Knights. But what's really exciting about Jediism is that there are Jedi Knights. And Jediism can be traced, of all places, to North Wales. So shout out to my home Wales, even though I'm from the south. The Church of Jediism, and you can Google it, you can read about it, was founded by two brothers called Daniel Jones and Barney Jones. And they were... have I got that surname right? Let me just check very quickly. I've just started doubting myself. It is Welsh, definitely. Let me see. I want to get these things right, you know?
That's fair. We do have the power of edits. Although, you know, this will probably be left in because I'm very lazy when it comes to edits. Daniel Jones. Now, Daniel Jones is the leader of the Church of Jediism, and they use Star Wars ideas in that metaphorical sense that we've just been discussing with invented religions, that there is a force. One can be a force for good, and it's very much presented as a very spiritual religion. There isn't much of an emphasis on a deity at all. Jones in the past has described it as a philosophy. More than a religion, but they will also, if you go on their website, they have a doctrine that you can read. They have advice and even offerings of wedding ceremonies. You can have a Jedi wedding ceremony or a naming ceremony for your child, which is known as a knighting ceremony, because you have made into a Jedi Knight. It's a lot of fun, but it's also taken very seriously as well, because these ideas from Star Wars are being used on a metaphorical level to address very
very important issues such as meaning, who someone is, how they interact with the world around them. And it's, Daniel Jones is a very big fan of Star Wars, but he's taken something that he loves from a pop culture level and has applied it to a spiritual, philosophical angle. And I met Daniel and Barney years ago when I was an undergraduate, and they spoke, and this was my first introduction to the idea of invented religions, and it really challenged. I kind of had that moment that you just mentioned, Vivian, when you first started studying religion and started to really realize, oh my gosh, what is religion? I thought I had it figured out. This was the moment where I realized that I didn't have it figured out, and I've not had it figured out since, because this really challenged what a religion was to me, because I could see that Daniel and Barney were doing religion. They they had their Jedi robes, for example, and they have these rituals, this doctrine, this meaning making. It's all there, and I had to get past that barrier of, but it's just Star Wars.
Yeah.
And that was my initial experience, and then that's how I got over that barrier and really started to break down what religion is. But there's a really interesting story involving Jediism that I wanted to bring into this conversation. I've got a Guardian article in front of me, and this was back in 2009.
Put this in the show notes for anyone who's interested in also reading it.
Yes, yeah, I think that would be a good idea. I remember this story breaking at the time, and I ended up, because of course at this point I'd been studying religion for a couple of years, so I understood that Jediism is a religion and breaking down that category of religion. And I had a almost fierce argument with a friend who was taking the position that Vivian's ex was taking. Well, this is absurd. It can't be a religion because it's just Star Wars. They're just taking the piss. But I want to read some of the article regardless. Tesco has been accused of religious discrimination after the company ordered the founder of a Jedi religion to remove his hood or leave a branch of the supermarket in North Wales. Daniel Jones, founder of the religion inspired by the Star Wars films, says he was humiliated and victimised for his beliefs following the incident at a Tesco store in Bangor. The 23-year-old, who founded the International Church of Jediism, which has 500,000 followers worldwide, was told that the hood flouted store rules. For context, just to interrupt this article, this was back during the period when there was almost a moral panic in the UK surrounding hoodies, and the fact that there was violent crime being perpetrated by young people wearing hoods, so you couldn't identify who they were.
Isn't that a whole other can of worms to get into?
Stores and so on. Yeah, exactly. And stores were adopting this policy of not letting people wear hoods in stores because CCTV couldn't see their faces. And it was also during that period when David Cameron was doing that really awful Hug a Hoodie campaign.
I forgot about that.
Were you? Yeah. I was going to ask if you were in the UK
I can't
at the
remember,
time, Vivian. But
yeah.
You've always been an Anglophile, so you'll have seen it because he got utterly ripped for it. Anyway, sorry, back to this article. The grocery empire struck back, claiming that the three best-known Jedi Knights in the Star Wars movies, Yoda, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke Skywalker, all appeared in public without their hoods. Jones, from Holyhead, who is known by the Jedi name Morda Hehol, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, sorry Daniel if you're listening, said his religion dictated that he should wear the hood in public places and is considering legal action against the chain. Quote, "It states in our Jedi doctrination that I can wear headwear. It just covers the back of my head," he said. "You have a choice of wearing headwear in your home or at work, but you have to wear a cover for your head if you are in public." He said he'd gone to the store to buy something to eat during his lunch break when staff approached him and ordered him to the checkout, where they explained he would have to remove the offending hood or leave the store. Quote, they said, take it off. And I said, no, it's part of my religion. It's part of my religious right. I gave them a Jedi Church business card. Nothing more authentic than a business card. They weren't listening to me, and they were rude. They had 3 people around me. It was intimidating. Jones, who has made an official complaint to Tesco, is considering a boycott of the store and is seeking legal advice. Tesco said he hasn't been banned. Jedis are very welcome to shop in our stores, although we would ask them to remove their hoods. Obi-Wan Kenobi, Yoda and Luke Skywalker all appeared hoodless without ever going to the dark side, and we are only aware of the Emperor as the one who never removed his hood.
Oh, shots fired!
If the... yeah, right, we're really getting into lore here. If Jedi walk around our stores with their hoods on, they'll miss a lot of special offers. Okay, now, I read that entire article out, but there's a number of reasons why I read that out. Firstly, I think it's just a really interesting story. But secondly, notice the way that article was written, which, made its puns based on, the grocery empire struck back. But look at the way Tesco responded, with derision, with humour. And what I'm going to do here now is really break down the category of religion. Would you ask a Muslim, for example, to remove headdress in a store? Would you ask a Christian to remove their crucifix necklace, which recently was a case with British Airways? And if we're breaking this down, is it right to ask someone to remove their hoodie if they are a Jedi? I'm not asking anyone to have the answer to this. These are purely hypothetical questions. But if we are to break these categories down, is Daniel Jones a victim of religious discrimination?
Oh, are you asking me directly? Sorry, you looked at me very expectantly.
No, I'm not asking you directly, but sorry. But I do think this is a really interesting example of how religion is treated and respected in the public domain. Because that response from Tesco, the Emperor is the one who never removed his hood. If they walk around, they'll miss a lot of our special offers. They've taken a humorous response. And I can understand why they did that.
Well, but I think there's something weirdly kind of alongside that. So let's just kind of take this to, say, a Christian example. Which you present. And I should stress, there are Christian groups that also wear headwear like a hijab. So it is not just Muslims who would choose to wear things covering their hair. But so let's just say that someone asked a Christian to remove, say, a cross or something like that. And then they shot back with, well, only Satan wouldn't remove their cross. I mean, because it's like they chose the other side. They chose the evil of the universe. And I know that it's a little bit different, but they chose the mythological evil to compare them to, which seems almost doubly shit.
Yeah, and there was also there was a story a few years ago. A British Airways employee won a court case after she was asked to stop visibly displaying a cross necklace. And this is a whole other conversation about visibility of religion and religion in the workplace. But she was successful in court that it was ruled that she should be able to, just read in the article here because our conversation has just reminded me, she's claimed that she was unfairly discriminated against when asked to stop wearing a cross. So there's an interesting conversation here, isn't there, about how religion is valued in society and how certain religions are treated with more respect than others. I see this a lot as a scholar of new religions, that I see a lot of the minority groups that I study being quite marginalized based on the fact that A, they're marginalized, and A, they're a minority group without many members, and B, they're new. And people do seem to really struggle with the idea of a new religion being legitimate, rather than something that has the centuries-long heritage of another religion that they have grown up aware of. And I thought the example of the hoodie in the Tesco store is, I mean, I'm not making a comment either way whether he should have taken it off or not. I just think it's a really interesting conversation to have about how we treat new invented religions, how we treat religions in general, and what is perceived as legitimate religion. Because you can see from Tesco's response that this is not being perceived as a legitimate religion. I appreciate I'm reading.
Yeah, this isn't a legitimate
I am
problem
reading between the lines, of course. And I can understand why they made this humorous response, because they knew it would get reported humorously by news outlets. That wherever they would be, this would be discussed and reported on, there would be the inevitable jokes about the Empire striking back and so on. And they're playing to the gallery. So I get why Tesco did that. But but for me, it's just a really great case study. So that's Jediism, which is using pre-existing popular culture on a metaphorical level. I wanted to also mention the Church of the SubGenius. Now, I want to give a little disclaimer before I mention the Church of the SubGenius. They're very much a recent fascination for me. I've been aware of them for a while, but it's only recently that I've really started looking into them, and I think they're going to be my new research project that I'm really interested in. So I would very much like, if Vivian gives me the permission, to revisit the Church of the SubGenius at a later date and essentially just give a bit of an introductory overview to who they are today. And I think this is very much an introductory session to invented religions anyway. I think in future episodes we'll be unpacking this more.
There are obviously far more than just Jediism and Church of the SubGenius out there, and it would be fun to kind of spend, as you said, an episode digging into something and maybe even inviting on a couple of guests that might have a little bit more insight to it. And hell, if Daniel Jones wants to come on to talk about Jediism,
that would be really fun, actually. He recently did an interview with Piers Morgan on Good Morning Britain, which means he has...
We are better than
I was going to say, he
Daniel.
clearly has a level of patience that I don't have. And, Piers Morgan's, would you believe it, understanding of religion was incredibly limited. And...
Oh, you don't say.
The entire conversation was just Piers Morgan being Piers Morgan. So, well done to Daniel Jones for having the patience to sit through that. If you'd like to appear on our podcast, I hope we will be a much better source of conversation for you. Anyway, the Church of the SubGenius is, unlike Jediism, it is a satirical religion. It is a parody religion, but it is still taken very seriously by its adherents, even though they are aware of the joke. And it is very much a joke. So something that members of the Church of SubGenius will often say is, fuck them if they can't take a joke. They've been quite controversial over the years, and they really have... I think, very successfully broken down the category of religion and shown what religion can be. So the story goes that the Church of the SubGenius was founded by a prophet called J.R. Bob Dobbs, often referred to as Bob. He is a 1950s salesman. Now, the reality is that Bob never existed. The image of Bob that you can frequently see online and on Church of SubGenius materials is a piece of clip art. But there is this narrative around, and everyone's in on the joke that Bob never existed, but they talk about him as though he did. The Church of the SubGenius was actually founded in the late 70s by two men called Ivan Stang and Philo Drummond. And they were essentially two nerds who were hanging out and started creating pamphlets and materials that incorporated ancient myths and pop culture figures, and they created an impressively detailed belief system. So what I find really interesting about the Church of the SubGenius is that they position themselves as a rejection of societal norms. So they've always portrayed themselves as the outcasts, the outsiders of society, and that they understand religion and everyday life a bit more than others, but they're still not geniuses, they're sub-geniuses. They appreciate that they still don't have it all figured out. And there is a division in the Church of SubGenius, with Church of SubGenius members being the ones who are clued in to what's really going on, and then the norms of society, people who are known as the Pinks. And the Pinks are under the control of a UFO conspiracy. And I think the Pinks are very much, they're often depicted as the archetype of neoliberalism, the corporate guy with an office job who doesn't have what's really going on figured out. Right. And there is humour in abundance in the Church of SubGenius. So they're using pop culture figures, they're using ancient myths, they're combining them to create a narrative. And it is taken very seriously, despite the fact they know it's a joke. There is a absolutely fantastic documentary about the Church of the SubGenius on YouTube. I don't normally like documentaries about forms of new religions, but the one about the Church of SubGenius is really great. And there's someone, one of the Church of SubGenius members in that documentary says, and I'm paraphrasing, but he says something along the lines of, it's an art form that looks like a religion, that looks like an art form, that looks like a religion. It is both at the same time. It is a joke, but it is taken very seriously. Something that the two founders of the Church of SubGenius found, and they mentioned this in the documentary, quite alarming in the 1980s, was how some people got into the Church of SubGenius who weren't in on the joke and didn't realise it was a joke. And when they found out that Bob didn't exist and that it was just pop culture icons and old myths that they were fascinated in, that they had created a bricolage of ideas, these people freaked out. So they found that quite surprising. But the Church of SubGenius continues to this day. They had a prediction of an apocalypse that never came, of course, but that still doesn't matter. They still had a ceremony for the end of the world, and this is depicted in the documentary as well, knowing that it wasn't going to come. And then when it didn't come, they all threw things at the founders of the church and stuff like that, because they were playing along with this outrage that the world hadn't ended. But what I find really fascinating about them is that there is this sense of community, there is a sense of belonging, and they emphasize the fact that they're all weirdos. They're a network of weirdos outside societal norms, and they do have that functionally religious element, even though everything they do is poking fun at religion. So one of the core concepts of the Church of SubGenius is the idea of slack. And Carol Cusack has described slack as something that has an ineffable nature to it. So the Church of SubGenius members can attribute meaning to it. Now, slack is not clearly defined, but it is generally understood as living an easy and comfortable life by avoiding hard work and having regular sex. And by gaining slack, you I guess it's, you could draw comparisons to other religious ideas. You improve your livelihood by having more slack. So avoiding hard work, having a lot of sex, having a comfortable life. Very, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that is, in a nutshell, what the Church of SubGenius is. They're very visually distinctive. They've got this, I don't even know how to describe it, but there is a moment in their ceremonies when they gather that maybe they've got a name for it. I need to find out. Again, as I'm saying, I'm in the very early days of discovering the Church of SubGenius, but I just wanted to talk about them, where they will take their index finger and rub it up and down their throat and create a gargling noise, which I won't do for people who are listening with headphones. And they will all start doing it. And it's very comical, it's very humorous, but again, it's very ritualistic. And it is a religion that is a joke, that is a religion that is a joke, to riff off the idea of the member in the documentary. It is taken very seriously, even though they're in on it. And then hence the phrase "fuck them if they can't take a joke." Have you seen anything to do with the Church of SubGenius before, Vivian?
No, this was new to me when you basically mentioned them as in the notes. So I did a quick Google, but I didn't get much into it, and it does not surprise me that Carol Cusack has written about them, because Carol Cusack writes about everything.
She does.
But yeah, it's, to me though, the notion of kind of parody religions, and parody religions that are trying to almost make a political statement, for lack of a better term, about the kind of state of religion and the way that society treats religion, is not inherently new with them. Satanism in America, for instance, is heavily political. They typically step in order to prove the kind of hypocrisy of the church and state distinctions in America, which is always very firm in non-Christian religions, but they are very happy to have statues of the Ten Commandments on court steps and things like that. And so the Church of Satan will kind of step in and say, well, then you should put a statue of Satan up here, or Bahamut, as a way to try to demonstrate just how absurd the hypocrisy is in America. So a lot of Church of Satan is kind of founded, at least in America, is founded on that kind of endeavor. So this isn't, to me, the idea of it isn't massively new, but it seems really like a more fun version.
Yeah, absolutely. And they do.
Oh, I mean, I'm sure my Satan friends are very fun, I should stress, but
of course.
But the idea of sitting in a group with your friends making gurgling noises just sounds fun.
Yeah, it's also chaotic as well. So if you watch footage throughout their history, there's a chaos, and there's almost something. I get the impression that the members are finding it very cathartic. But all throughout, they're poking fun at the absurdities of religion, so to speak, and poking fun at what as you were saying, the Ten Commandments being displayed, so there should be a statue of Satan. It's breaking down the category of religion, and people do that in really fun and interesting ways.
It is, yeah. And I think there is something really strange about the fact that a lot of people, and I should stress here, particularly in the West, in the UK and the US in particular, tend to have trouble understanding play and joke as being serious. We tend to think of them as very separate things. You are either serious or you are playing, and there's kind of no middle ground. And there's a couple of anthropologists who have, tried to coin the term of serious play. This was kind of hinted at in Clifford Geertz a little bit with, I think he called it deep play. And Sherry Ortner has talked about serious play, so it's kind of thrown around. But I don't like this term because they always use it as something special, right? That religion is the serious play, and it's different, and no other play can be as different as this thing.
It's a value judgment.
Yeah, and so I enjoy whenever I see serious play that isn't what we typically think of. That's something that I've always really embodied in the work that I've looked at, everything on Reddit and the horror stories and creepypasta, which is what my specialty is for anybody who doesn't know that from listening to this, is always that level of serious play. And I think when you do play, no matter what it is that you're doing, there's always certain levels of seriousness to it. I remember being a kid and trying to play tag, and it being, you could ruin friendships over breaking certain rules in those kinds of games, and that still holds up. And I was much older when my younger siblings were born, so I saw kind of a growing up process in a very more adult way, and seeing them take certain games really seriously. And I think a lot of adults like to write it off as just this weird child thing, but that doesn't really go away. It's just what we associate it with is slightly different.
Oh yeah, how many people have fallen out over football?
Well, exactly.
It's the same. That is play.
Yeah, so I always enjoy seeing serious play, and I think that's something that people should maybe keep in mind if they want to kind of do a little bit of looking into Church of the SubGenius as well, is keeping in mind that people can be playing and be serious about it all at the same time, and it's not contradictory.
I may have to get a reading list from you, because I am planning on doing some stuff with learning more about the Church of SubGenius, so this would be an interesting.
I can give you some notes on play, because I have obviously spent a bit of time in that arena.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, please do. I would be very keen, because I would like later on down the line to return to the SubGenius with a more detailed podcast discussion than my introductory thoughts today.
Well, then we have to keep this podcast going for at least a couple months to years, depending on how long it takes you.
Yeah. So I need to get writing and researching. To wrap up, because this has been an introductory session overall, I saw, Vivian, that you wrote in the research notes, or rather the podcast notes, that there should be a question for Aled to help sum things up. When is satire and metaphor religion?
Okay, I think we might have answered it slightly, but...
Yeah, well, I'm going to turn it around on you to wrap up as well, but I'm going to quickly say satire and metaphor is religion. And, okay, I am one of those people who breaks religion down so much that I will make anything religion, I will say. But at the same time, to answer it a bit more detailed, when is satire and metaphor religion? It is when it is... when there is a meaning to the audience. So for the Church of SubGenius, even though they know it's a joke, even though they know it's completely invented, it is still important to them. So it's about meaning making, but it's also about how it connects them with one another. They are a group of people who are connected by this satire. They are a group of people who are connected by the prophet Bob. They know Bob doesn't exist, and they know each other. They interact with one another based on this. A community has formed around it. But that, in the same sense, I say that popular culture is religion as well. That religion is so deeply ingrained in society that you can't... I always struggle with taking religion out of popular culture, or taking it out of politics, or whatever you're looking at. Because it is so complex. So that is a very... It's by far not... it's far from a perfect answer to that question, but it's me thinking out loud about how I approach that idea.
Yeah, and it's very sociologist of you to look for the community and the group of people that that is there.
Yeah, it is.
Because I always think of things on a more individual level, because I am an anthropologist. But so yeah, I think to me there is an identity level that's going on as well, right? Where even if you removed one person from the community group, and it examined them sounds so like weird, but like if you really looked at them kind of as an individual level, there's going to be more to the connection that is part of their identity, that relates to how they see themselves in their position in the world, and how they define themselves in more ways than just, I put this on a census record because it's funny. And I'm sure if we do manage to get Daniel Jones on this podcast, he'll have a lot more to say about what it means to be a Jedi than just, I put it on the census record because it's funny. There's more to it. There's something about what that helps these people to understand about themselves, about the world around them, about their relationship to each one of these elements. And when we talk about trying to remove religion from its context in culture and how difficult that is, a lot of it is because your identity in regards to religion also defines your identity in regards to these other contexts, right? So it's very difficult to remove Christianity from American politics, for instance, because it's so deeply embedded, and a lot of people have certain political views because of their religion, or vice versa, that it is deeply connected. And so I'm sure that to remove Church of the SubGenius from one of its adherents is to remove all sorts of other aspects of their identity as well, that you can't just remove the church and then everything else remains the same. So yeah, I think there is something much more inherent to the individual that makes it meaning making, to always use that term. I got so sick of that term when I was teaching undergrads, but it really is just one of the better ones in order to use in order to explain things. That if there is a process of understanding and making meaning in the world, and that helps people, whether that be to find a community or to understand themselves or to have a bit of fun, then that's still really important.
Indeed. Communitas.
If you enjoyed this podcast, or you are enjoying the series, please do let us know. I got an email right after our first episode launched from a listener it was a very lengthy, wonderful email with their own thoughts on the definition of religion and where they saw things fitting in. And I haven't responded yet, but I have every intention to. And I was going to get some of Alad's thoughts to include into that email as well.
Yes.
Please do get in touch. It made my day to get that email. So if you are listening and you have a lot of thoughts on invented religion, and you have thoughts on what you'd want to hear us talk about, any of that kind of stuff, please do let us know. Send us an email, get in touch with us on social media, any of that kind of stuff. And speaking of which, Alad, if people want to talk to you about Church of the SubGenius somewhere, where can they go?
They can go to my Twitter page at AlaJLL Thomas. I am there more than I should be in my procrastination. So yeah, come and have a chat with me on Twitter. Where can they find you, Vivian, if they want to talk to you about meaning making and communitas?
You can find me at Vivian Asimos pretty much anywhere. And you can also find my website, incidentalmythology.com, and there's a contact page on there. And I think that's what this person did to get in contact, because it was through my website, which was a bit weird. But that's a way. So you can go there if you want to do that. And basically everything else that we're doing is there as well. And obviously, Alad and I have another podcast that we do with our lovely friend Jonathan O'Donnell called What's Interesting About, which we do a little bit less researched and a little bit more loosey-goosey. So if you're interested in more of us, you can always go there.
Yeah. The sort of podcast you can enjoy listening to in the bath. Why the bath, I don't know. But I was just trying to think of a relaxing circumstance. Anyway, enjoy your baths.
Our lovely listeners share this podcast with this week? Last time we said share it with someone who likes Zelda. So
this week, share it to someone who likes Star Wars.
Ooh, yes. Share it with someone who likes Star Wars.
Lots of people like the Star Wars.
We'll get lots of listeners.
Yes. Although I am obliged to tell you all that Star Trek is better.
Oh, well, now we've just lost all of our Jedi listeners.
No,
thank you. We've ruined our chances of getting Daniel Jones on the podcast now.
I know, I am aware that Daniel does like Star Trek, so it's okay. I think he will still be on board.
All right. Well, thank you for chatting with me and teaching me all about all of this stuff, Alad. And thank you, lovely listeners, for joining us.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.